Someone says their name. You hear it. You smile. You shake their hand. And it's already gone. Not later. Not after a distraction. Immediately. Sometimes before the handshake has even ended, the name has slipped out of your grasp, like it was never fully there. And now you're stuck, nodding along to a conversation with someone whose name you do not have, hoping nobody says it back to you and exposes the gap, quietly calculating how many more minutes you can go before the moment where you're supposed to introduce this person to someone else, and you have nothing to introduce them with. And maybe you've decided this means something about you, that you're careless, or self-absorbed, or that your memory is somehow worse than everyone else's. It doesn't mean any of that. What's actually happening involves the strangest, most fragile part of human memory, a part that has almost nothing to do with how much you care, how smart you are, or how present you were in the moment. And once you understand what a name actually is to your brain, the shame stops making sense. You know this exact sequence. Someone introduces themselves. You hear the name clearly. You're not distracted. You're not being rude. You are, in that moment, genuinely trying to remember it. And 30 seconds later, it's not there. You can describe everything else about them, what they do for work, where they're from, the story they just told about their dog. You could pick their face out of 100 others without hesitation. But the name, the one specific arbitrary piece of information they gave you first, has simply not made it into storage. So you do the things everyone in this position learns to do. You avoid saying their name directly for the rest of the conversation, hoping context will carry you. You listen for someone else to say it so you can silently grab it. You ask a question you already know the answer to, just to buy time. Sorry, how do you spell that again? Even when the name is short enough that the question makes no sense, and you both quietly know it. And underneath all of it is a specific, private shame. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that forgetting someone's name means you don't care enough, that it's a small but real insult, that people who truly value others remember their names, and people who don't. So every time it happens, you don't just lose the name. You lose a little bit of your own sense of being a good, attentive person. And here's the strange part. The people who study memory for a living will tell you something that contradicts almost everything you've assumed about this. To understand why this happens, you have to understand something strange about how your brain stores information about other people. Imagine you meet someone and you're told two different facts about them. The first, he's a baker. The second, his name is Mr. Baker. Same sound, same word, almost. But your brain treats them in completely different ways. Baker. The occupation connects instantly to a web of meaning already sitting in your mind. Bread, flour, early mornings, the smell of an oven. When your brain reaches for that word later, it has dozens of paths leading back to it. Baker, the surname, connects to nothing. It's not a description, it's not a clue. It tells your brain nothing about who this person actually is. It's just a sound, arbitrarily assigned, with a single thin thread linking it to this one specific face. And here's what cognitive psychologists have found again and again in study after study. That single thread is unusually easy to break. Proper names are stored almost nowhere else in your memory except attached to that one person. Unlike most words, you can't swap them for a synonym if you forget. If you forget the baker's occupation, you can still say the guy who makes bread. If you forget Baker, the surname, there is no substitute. The retrieval is all or nothing. And here's the layer that makes it worse. The moment someone tells you their name, your brain is also doing several other things simultaneously. Reading their faces, processing their tone, planning how you're going to respond, managing your own posture and expression so you come across the way you want to. All of that competes in real time for the exact same limited mental space the name needs in order to be properly recorded. Which means in many cases, the name was never actually lost. It was never fully captured in the first place. You are not careless. You are not bad with people. You are not someone who secretly doesn't value the person standing in front of you. You have a brain doing something every human brain does, treating an arbitrary, meaning-empty label as one of the hardest possible pieces of information to hold onto, while simultaneously asking it to manage everything else a social introduction requires. And here's where it gets more specific, and where your own nervous system, not just your memory architecture, plays a real part. If you're someone who tends to monitor social situations closely, watching how you're coming across, tracking whether you're saying the right thing, staying alert to the room, you are spending the exact same mental resources the name needed. Researchers have a name for one version of this. They call it the next-in-line effect. It was first documented by observing people in a group where everyone takes a turn speaking. The finding was strange and consistent. People could barely remember what was said immediately before their own turn. Not because they weren't listening, but because they were already rehearsing what they were about to say. A social introduction works the same way. While someone is telling you their name, some part of you may already be preparing your own response, your handshake, your greeting, the version of yourself you're about to present. And attention, unlike effort, cannot be in two places at once. So the name arrives at exactly the moment your internal resources are pointed somewhere else. Not because you didn't care, because you were doing something else your nervous system considered more urgent in that instant. Managing how you were coming across. On this channel, we call this pattern the name gap. Not a memory deficiency, not evidence that something is wrong with how your brain works in general. A structural collision between the most fragile category of information your memory handles and the exact moment your attention is most divided. Here's how it actually plays out, moment by moment. You're introduced to someone new. The handshake begins, and in that handshake, in that exact 2 or 3 seconds, your brain is running an entire silent checklist. Eye contact, smile. What should I say next? Did I get their name right? Should I repeat it? That checklist is so demanding that the actual sound of their name, the raw acoustic information, sometimes passes through your awareness without ever being properly filed. This is why you can replay the moment perfectly in your memory, the room, their face, the small talk that followed, and still come up completely empty when you try to reach for the one piece of information you most wanted to keep. Or this. You're at a gathering with several people you've just met, and you're approaching your turn to speak. Someone 2 people away is being introduced. You hear the sound of their name, but some part of you has already started rehearsing what you're going to say when it's your turn, and that name simply doesn't make it into storage. Not because it wasn't said, because you were somewhere else when it arrived. Or this. You meet someone and you're genuinely warm with them. Present, engaged, asking good questions, making them feel completely heard. And somehow, despite all of that real connection, their name is the one thing that didn't land. Because your attention in that moment was on them as a person, their story, their energy, what they were saying, not on the arbitrary 3-syllable label attached to it. That last one is the one most people never expect. The version of you that cares the most, that listens the hardest, that's most attuned to the person in front of you, is often the version most likely to lose the name. Because your attention went exactly where it should have gone, to them, not to the label. This is the name gap, not a sign of disinterest. Sometimes, almost the opposite of one. Here's what most advice gets wrong about this. It tells you to repeat the name immediately. Nice to meet you, David. Say it right back. Lock it in. And for years, that was the standard advice everyone gave. But recent research found something almost nobody expects. Saying the name immediately can actually interfere with remembering it. Speaking takes real cognitive effort. Planning the words, coordinating your mouth, monitoring how you sound. All of that competes directly with the quiet mental work your brain needs to do to actually encode the name. You end up using the exact resources you needed for storage on production instead. So here are 3 tools that work with how memory for names actually functions, not against it. Tool 1, the 4-second hold. When someone tells you their name, resist the urge to say it back right away. Instead, hold a silent beat. Look at them. Let the sound settle for about 4 seconds before you respond with anything at all. This isn't awkward the way it sounds. It reads as attentiveness, not hesitation. What it actually does is give your brain a clear window, uninterrupted by the demands of speech, to bind the sound of their name to their face before you ask it to do anything else. Then, once that pause has passed, you can use the name. But the encoding happens in the silence, not in the repetition. Tool 2, the concrete anchor. Your brain holds on to vivid, concrete images far more easily than it holds on to arbitrary sounds. So the moment you hear a name, give it something to land on. Take the sound of the name and turn it into one quick, specific image, even a strange one, and connect it to something distinctive about their face. This isn't about elaborate memory systems. It's one image, held for a second or two, deliberately. Paul becomes a 10-foot pole. Rose becomes a flower tucked behind an ear. The stranger the image, the more it tends to stick, because your memory is built to hold pictures far more easily than it holds plain sound. You're not memorizing a name. You're giving an arbitrary label the one thing it's missing, a thread of meaning to hold on to. Tool 3, the delayed repetition. This is the quietest tool, and the one most people skip entirely. A few minutes after the introduction, not immediately, but once the conversation has moved somewhere else, find a natural moment to use their name again. So, David, how do you know the host? This delayed use does what immediate repetition can't. It reactivates the name after the initial encoding window has passed, strengthening a connection that's still fragile rather than competing with the moment it was first formed. One use at the introduction. One use a few minutes later. That's often enough to move a name from a fragile single thread into something that will still be there tomorrow. You were never bad with people. You were never careless or distracted or secretly indifferent to the person standing in front of you. You have a brain that treats names, strange, arbitrary little sounds with no built-in meaning, as some of the hardest information it's ever asked to hold. And you were asking that brain to do it in the exact moment it was also managing a face, a tone, a handshake, and the version of yourself you were trying to present. That is not a character flaw. That is what every human memory system does, because that is what proper names are. You don't have to carry the shame of every forgotten name as evidence that you don't care. Some of your most genuine moments of connection, the ones where you were fully present with someone, fully listening to who they actually are exactly the moments most likely to cost you their name. That's not a failure of attention. That's where your attention was supposed to go. You can keep being the person who listens that closely. You can keep being warm, present, and genuinely curious about people. You just don't have to treat a forgotten name as proof that any of that wasn't real. Your memory doesn't always understand that a meaningless sound can belong to someone who matters deeply to you. But you can teach it. 1 4-second pause at a time. If this describes something you've quietly carried shame about for years, the panic of the empty introduction, the names that vanish the instant they arrive, you don't have to explain it. Just leave one line in the comments. You'll discover very quickly how many people have been apologizing for this their entire lives. And if you want to understand the layer underneath this one, why social situations drain so much of your attention in the first place, and why some nervous systems are working harder in every room than others ever have to, that's exactly where the next video goes, because the name gap and the difference loop are running on the same limited resource. Subscribe to What is Psyche for more.